Hi everyone, I hope you all are great. Today we will have simple compound complex and compound complex sentences. First, you have to log in using the aplusstudent.com. On your name, move on to language at the grade 9. This lesson is for the high school advanced writing, but we will take the lesson under the grade 9, okay? So, lesson will be identify dependent and independent clauses. Is a sentence simple, compound complex, or compound complex? Okay, so a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject and a predicate, all right? Under the clause, we have the independent clause and then the dependent clause. So an independent clause is a complete thought. It can stand alone as a sentence. So whenever you see the independent they are complete thoughts and then they could stand alone in a sentence. Now we also have a dependent clause. It's not a complete thought. It cannot stand alone as a sentence. Okay, so just like independent. So independence, they can stand on their own, they don't need any help. And then dependents cannot stand alone, they need help. Okay. All right, so we have the examples. We have let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. The clause can stand alone, it is independent. Now, after Kevin gets off work, now the clause cannot stand alone because it just says after Kevin gets off work. What happens after he gets off work, okay? So that's why this is a dependent clause. Alright, so we have a complex sentence. Now, the complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and a dependent clause. So it's made up of both clauses. The dependent clause is a complete sentence. In a complete sentence, usually begins with a subordinating conjunction or relative pronoun. So that's how the dependent clause begins, and that's how you can identify it. So now the subordinating conjunction include after, although, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. Now the relative pronouns include that, which, who, whom, and whose. Okay, so it's either the dependent clause starts with the subordinating conjunction or the relative pronoun. So it starts with either of these words that we've seen here. So let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe after Kelvin gets off work. So after, it's a subordinating conjunction, so it is starting the dependent clause. So it begins with the subordinating conjunction. That's the dependent clause. Now, during his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi Fountain, which is in Rome. Now, this dependent clause here is starting with what? Which is a relative pronoun. Okay? So let's look at some examples. Select the independent clause. If their mode is disturbed, fire ants will attack their victim aggressively with incredibly painful sting. So if over here is what? If over here is what? The dependent clause. So from fire ants will be what? The independent clause. Because remember that they could stand alone. Okay? So we have over here we have select the dependent clause. Okay? According to Pickle Packers International, the total annual consumption of pickles in the United States is more than 2 million pounds, which equals about £9 per person. So where does the dependent clause start from? Alright, so we have which equals about £9 per person. So which here is a relative pronoun, and that's the start of the dependent clause. Okay, let's move on to the test. You can share your answers with me if you know them. So select the dependent clause here. Since Japan has little arable land, it cannot grow enough crops for its population and most imports much of its food. So is it gonna be the first or second for the dependent clause? All right, so we have since because this is a subordinating conjunction, so it can start the dependent clause. Okay, so now we have what? Each year, around 2.5 million people visit the ruins of Pompeii, which was destroyed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. So is it going to be first or second for the dependent clause? Okay, so we have the second one. It's starting with a relative pronoun. While the phone connected 50 million people within 75 years of its inception, internet accomplished the same feat in only 4 years. Dependent clause, first or second? All right, so we have the second one, while. Vicky sat relentless in the car while she waited for the heater to defrost the windshield. Dependent clause. Okay, so we have the second one. Okay, so dependent clause. Between 1860 and 1861, 11 states formally seceded from the United States of America and formed an independent nation, which they named the Confederate States of America, first or second for the dependent clause. So, dependent clause, we have the second one. While a stray cat is usually defined as a lost or abandoned pet, a feral cat lives in the wild and avoids human contact. Independent clause. Okay, so we have the first one for the independent clause. Okay, so if a word is spelled the same forward and backward, for example, civic, rotator, radar, kayak, or date, it is known as palindrome. So is it going to be first, second, or third for dependent clause? Okay, so we have dependent clause. So we have what? The first one, okay, is starting with if. All right. So today's medical students owe a debt to Dr. Henry Gray, whose renowned 1858 book, Anatomy Descriptive and Surgical, is like an indispensable guide to the structure of the human body. Is it going to be first or second for dependent clause? All right, so we have whose, okay, from the relative pronoun. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We'll move on to the next one. So make sure you complete this lesson if you haven't done it yet. Okay? Okay, so we already know the clause and the independent clauses and dependent clauses. So clause is a group of words that contains both a subject and a predicate. And under that we have dependent clause and independent clause. Now independent clause is a complete thought that can stand alone, and dependent clause is not a complete thought and cannot stand alone. So just like we have the oranges on our tree are ripe, independent. After we pick up Kelvin from work, it is dependent. So now a simple sentence is made up of a single independent clause. So from the independent clause that we have the complete thought that can stand alone, that's where we have the simple sentence and it is made up of single independent clause. So we have Ben and I spent all day relaxing at the by the pool. So some simple sentences have introductory phrases, but the introductory phrase is part of the predicate. Okay? So just like we have in the winter, Ben usually wears his heavy coat. So you can also say Ben usually wears his heavy coat in the winter. Alright, so that's it for like the simple sentence. And then next up we have a compound sentence. Compound sentence is made up of two independent clauses. So the clauses that can stand alone and it's a complete thought. So we join the compound sentence by what? Coordinating conjunction, okay, such as and, but, or so. So that's how we connect like the compound sentences. Okay, so we saw the flash of lightning. So we have a comma, and seconds later we heard the rumble of thunder. So that's the compound sentence. Okay. So next up, we have the complex sentence. Now, the complex sentence is made up of what? An independent clause and a dependent clause. So it's made up of the two clauses that we have. The dependent clause in a complex sentence usually begins with a subordinating conjunction or relative pronoun. Okay. So we have subordinating conjunctions include after, although, as, because, before, if, since, unless, until, when, and while. And then the relative pronouns include that, which, who, whom, or whose. Okay. So we have, for example, if she ever gets the chance, Terry would love to visit the Egyptian pyramids. So we have if over here. If is what? Subordinating conjunction. So this part is the beginning of the dependent clause. Okay. And now during his trip to Italy, Tony visited the Trevi Fountain, which is in Rome. Now this part here has the relative pronoun. So it's either subordinating conjunction or relative pronoun. So that's for the complex sentence. So it's a mixture of the independent and then dependent clause. Okay. All right. So last part we have the compound complex. Okay. So the compound complex sentence is made up of two or more independent clauses and one or more dependent clause. So it could be made up of two independent clause and then one or more dependent clause. So we have after Samantha left work, she stopped at the bank and then she went to the gym. So sometimes a dependent clause in a complex or compound complex sentence can interrupt an independent clause. Okay. So over here we have after, right? So this after here is a subordinating conjunction. So this part is gonna be what? The dependent clause. And then here we have independent clause and independent clause. So in a compound complex, you can have two or more independent clauses and then one or more dependent clause. So we also have orcas that are kept in captivity often have bent dorsal fins. So this over here is just an explanation as to how the dependent clause can interrupt the independent clause sometimes. Okay. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so we have which type of sentence is this? Since it takes approximately 1000 years for a used printer cartridge to decompose, recycling these plastic ink dispensers help the environment. So what sentence is this? So we have the complex since it's starting with since and then since is what subordinating conjunction. Okay, so let's move on to the test. You can share your answers with me if you know them, okay? So this literally like the same question as the previous one we just did. So this is complex, okay? So which type of sentence is this? As Pat sat down on the rickety old chair, it abruptly collapsed beneath him. Simple or compound? Okay, so what do we have here? Simple sentence. Okay, so students are unhappy with the new dress code requirements and they will be discussing their grievances at the next school board meeting. Simple or compound? So we have compound here because it has what? The coordinating conjunction, and because most wild orchids naturally affix themselves to trees and branches, planting an orchid in soil will likely kill it. First, second, which of them? So we have what's complex sentence here. Alright, so it starts with the subordinating conjunction. After a parrotfish eats algal covered coral, the coral travels through the fish's digestive system and then it deposits in the reef as white coral sand. First or second. Alright, so we have compound complex here. The vibrant trumpet-shaped blooms of the trumpet vine make it ideal for attracting hummingbirds. Simple or compound? Okay, so we have the simple sentence. Aaron has an unconventional swing, but he manages to drive the ball farther than some professional golfers, single or compound. Alright, so we have simple sentence. So that's it for our lesson under the simple, compound, and complex. Can you tell me if you have any questions? Okay, since we have no questions to end here, try to complete this lesson if you haven't done it. See you all next time. Bye.